We are tonight's entertainment.
You can't handle the truth.
The fire rises.
Pizza time.
You're a wizard, Harry.
So it begins.
You know how much I sacrifice?
You think that's air you're breathing?
Groovy.
I don't have friends. I got family.
We are sex people! 1, 2, 3, 4!
Craft Services.
Hi, Parth.
Hey, Trent.
You're looking well. Ready to podcast again about movies and food and their intersection?
Sure. What have you been eating most recently?
I gave you a little sneak peek of the hearty lunch I had, but
You did. You said that your lunch cost $32.
Yeah, we were complaining about someone refusing to spend $50 on something, and I said they could fucking nut up. My lunch was $32 today, but that was like a big venture for me. I don't do stuff like that very often, but we won't be discussing that today. I had this big lunch, and then I went and played pickleball with my friends from high school, and then we went and played Settlers of Catan, expanded version. Yeah, it's super expanded. At their house, which once you play expanded, it makes the normal version just seem kind of stupid. And then it was my friend Zach from The Last Jedi discussion. You remember his younger brother Sebastian Basile. It was his birthday the other day, and so they had some cake in the freezer, and so I ate a slice. And it was good.
Wow, that's pretty wonderful.
If you don't mind my asking, what about you?
Well, Trent, Viraj, friend of the show,
Your brother.
Scott Pilgrim
from the Scott Pilgrim episode.
He recently got his wisdom teeth removed.
Been
and
there?
by recently, I mean yesterday.
That sounds recent.
It is. And so the day before yesterday, my mom was like...
4 teeth ago.
Sure. My mom was like, because you're not going to be able to eat normally for quite a while, why don't I'll take you out to lunch and to dinner. And so
that's very nice.
For lunch, we went out.
It's like a double feature.
It is. For lunch,
food.
We went out to Thai Kitchen, which is very near me, and Thai food. I had pad Thai. But then for dinner, my parents were like, we're getting Chinese takeout. And so I asked for General Tso's chicken, which lasted for my dinner 2 days ago, my lunch yesterday, and my dinner tonight.
Wow, General Tso is really your best friend.
Me and the General, we go way back.
All the way to whatever war the General was the general of.
Sure.
And I guess we won the battle, which was this episode, and we'll win the war, which is the whole podcast. And we'll fight with General Tso.
To win the battle, you would need like wars. They would have like people on drums and like music people to sort of like get people.
The military
going.
Band,
exactly.
Of course,
they would have people sort of revving them up to go. And I'm just wondering, do we have anything to rev our audience up for this episode?
Yeah, we have the intro music.
My God, let's cue the intro.
Parth, what would you say if I told you that in high school, a Air Force recruiter came into my classroom as I was a senior, and I got it into my mind for like all of 24 hours. They were like, you can major in whatever you want, and we'll pay for it as long as you serve 2 years in the Air Force. And I was like, I'm going to dupe the Air Force, and I'm going to give them the 2 years the worst service of they've ever experienced, and I'm gonna go to NYU Film School, and I'm gonna milk this for all it's worth. And then by like the end of the day, I was like, I don't want to go to the fucking Air Force for 2 years. And then I didn't do that, and then I paid for my college education, which it turns out you can just go to a cheaper place, and you don't have to do all that bullshit.
Welcome back to Craft Services, where we talk about the movies. Each week we talk about a film, and hopefully you have a crew member of that film to talk with us about their experience working on the picture. This week we're continuing our discussion with
Production designer Patrick Sullivan.
about his work on...
About his work on Lee Isaac Chun's Twisters. And there's multiple twisters.
Twins!
There's multiple tornadoes, let's just go with that, in this film. The tornadoes appear simultaneously at times, which makes it not just a twisters, which is a hiccup that Parth will run into at the very beginning of this interview.
Well, at the very beginning of last week's episode.
This is part 2? That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Time flies when you're having fun. Time flies when you're interviewing production designer Patrick Sullivan about, his work.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about some specific scenes in this movie, but then also we start talking about some other movies he's worked on. We get into a few. We get into his collaborations with Uncle Steve.
That's Steven Spielberg to you.
Yes, we have sort of a conversation about how he and Tom Cruise didn't cross paths, but did work on the same movie. Some Michael Mann stuff. Yeah. I would say this is a pretty good interview. Huh? What would you say?
I heard someone say on a podcast recently, reminded me that Lee Isaac Chung directed Minari, which is a movie I liked. And
it's a movie I loved.
And at no point during Twisters was I like, I wonder if the person who's directing this directed Minari. But I enjoyed both those things quite a bit, dare I say, for different reasons. And this is going to be like us talking about it with like the production designer for, 30, 35 minutes. Like, well, that'll be that on that.
It's an extremely chill interview, as the kids like to say. And I think that
like a wind chill, like a weather phenomenon similar to a tornado.
Well, this interview is going to sweep you off your feet.
Like a freaking tornado might.
So why don't we just cue the interview?
Do you have any builds you constructed for scenes that were ultimately deleted? If you have any memorable scenes that don't appear in the final film?
No, nothing with a great build. I did watch the film and go, it often happens where, you're 6-8 months removed from working on it. So you're on another project and then you got to get back into it. The only thing that came to mind is part of and it wasn't a build, it was a location and a bit of a dress. Part of the sequence when Tyler calls the team back and says, "Hey guys, I need you to get together. We got this idea. We're going to do this thing." And then they go to the trailer shop and you see them ask for an aluminum. He goes, "The guy goes, you're going to want aluminum." There was the other element to that where they go to a chemical store, like a farm chemical store, to gather the big, giant bags of that material. And they just figured they didn't need to do that. And you don't miss it. And it doesn't affect the flow of the film. But that was really the only thing I can remember left on the editing floor, except for, of course, the kiss that everybody seems to want to talk about these days. But I didn't have anything to do with that. So that's about it.
Sure. We won't blame you. I believe the movie had to stop for the SAG strike. What was that like for you? Yeah,
it impacted me, but it was just had to call an audible and react. Just tell you what it kind of meant for us. We were shooting the rodeo sequence and we'd already shot everything in the grandstand, the leaves falling, the wind starting, people, evacuating. And then people started to run across the field to the parking lot and get in their cars. And then we were shooting where all the booths were with the belt buckles and cowboy hats and saddles that for sale and stuff. We got that far, and simultaneously there was a unit across the street working on second unit shooting the motel stuff. So it was, that whole sequence was right in the heart of it. But we were at a good spot when, I think it was a Wednesday or Thursday, we showed up and SAG went on strike and the cast just didn't show up. And I go, "Guess we're done." And they said, okay. It was so matter of fact, but we're all standing there and it's super hot and humid. And they just said, "All right, I guess we're shut down. We'll call you when it comes back." So what it meant for me there was we had to secure that. Like I had built the grandstand with the bleachers and the metal roof. That was our build. So the rodeo, the interesting part of that was the rodeo was a traveling rodeo that we booked to be at our spot, to do our rodeo. So the arena, the paddocks and all that. But thankfully, planning ahead and the impending strike, we knew that we had to shoot that out and get it done. So then they took that all away, and then we just, fenced in the whole thing, and we had to secure the motel, all the motel office that we built, and the pieces that were destroyed. The swimming pool was a build that we built for real. So that had to be plywooded over so nobody would fall in and get hurt. And then, of course, we were out at Crystal Springs where the other sequence was, the other tornado aftermath. We had to wrap up all those houses and weatherproof them, and because we knew storms were going to be happening, and then take away all the debris that we had spread out there. And then just went home for 118 days. And until the phone call came and they said, what's it going to take to ramp back up? And we got the gang together and everybody was happy to be back to work. And we just jumped back in. Now, the difference was when we got back to the houses, they were kind of mildewy because they were leaking a little bit, and we had to make sure that was all clean, bring the debris back, and we had to reassemble part of the rodeo, the booths again that we owed, and we just had to break down what the work was. And then we had, what was good about it was it helped the edit, because Isaac was able to cut the film together and kind of see the flow of the film. So in many ways, it kind of benefited. But I think there was a bit of a worry that it would affect the release date, but it ultimately didn't. We jammed it out. And, one of the opening shot of the film, ironically, because we're in Oklahoma, when she's in with her camera out on the vista, the very first thing you see is that tall green grass. Did you guys see that? You saw the film, right?
Yes, yeah. We saw
Hell
it at a
yeah.
drive-in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the very first thing you see, and I can't get over this, the very first shot you see, that's fake grass. That's actually plastic grass, because we had this beautiful bluff that we knew was the opening shot of the film, and it's gorgeous. It looks like something from Dances with Wolves. You come up over the bluff and there's this tall pasture grass, like to her waist. But then when the strike hit, we needed shoot that. And then when we came back, it was December. So all that grass was dormant now. So it was all tan. It was just all like straw. And we just said, fine. I called my greensman, who was amazing, Andrew Nowling, and I said, what we need to do. He already saw it on the call sheet. He was like, I know what I'm doing. I got to cover. I was like, okay. So we just had to make sure we knew the shot, and we just created this area with the green grass, and it was translucent and everything was beautiful, and you can backlight it. And we made sure that it accommodated it so they didn't need visual effects till the very last bit when the camera went up far enough to see beyond. But it was a good solve, and it was kind of ironic that it was fake grass, the very first shot of Twisters. It was fun.
I'm sort of amazed. We didn't think to ask this earlier, but in a movie of this nature, I'm sure, and you've worked on both iterations. Can you explain I'm sure there's like big fans pointed at people like a lot of time, or maybe not. Could you sort of explain how they're creating like this environment of wind?
Yeah, they are doing exactly that. Scott Fisher was our our special effects supervisor, and he's amazing. He was Christopher Nolan's guy. He did all of his Chris Nolan's films. Great crew, but it was Ritter fans, which are a common giant fan. They're quiet for their speed and size. They have wooden blades. But the other thing he has, everybody says it's a jet engine, but he corrected me once. He goes, it's really a jet fan. It's a jet power, but it's still a fan. It's not necessarily, it looks just like a jet engine on a trailer, but they were blasting those at them for real, different speeds depending on intensity needed. But the one thing you just had to be careful with, you didn't have debris in the air getting flung at people at super high speeds. So most of the debris you see is all VFX after everything is shot. They just do that in post-production and give all that three-dimensional, nature to it. And you can see the difference between 28 years ago and today, the sort of complexity and the layers of it, and the way authentic animation and gravity and all of that. And I just felt that this film, you feel more the power of the tornado. You feel more impact. You feel more speed. You feel more three-dimensionality of it. But as much as possible, there were no blue screens exterior in this movie because they didn't really need a blue screen to show where the tornado was. They just shot a plate and they were able to roto it in and do all that. So the only time that I can really recall the bulk of our work as blue screen was on stage when we did all the interior of the vehicles, inside, where they're inside, the camera's inside, or we're shooting through the glass. There were blue screens to just give us something to cut the windshields out and create the environment out there. That way it had the markers for tracking, for the refinery. But for the most part, we relied a lot on that. And then the hail, they had, ice crushers and put it in the path of the jet fan and blow ice, as hail at vehicles and at people. There was dust. Dust got kicked up into eyes and, you needed some eye drops. But you do see some sequences where they're wearing goggles, which really saves us. But that's a logical thing that they should wear anyway in a tornado situation. So, but it was there, and there was still plenty of collective noise from those things, and it had to be, dialogue had to be careful to make sure we, got the dialogue recorded and all. But there was plenty of practical effects in it, just like the first film. But it was really, smartly done and smartly applied. And Ben Snow would be there on the day, says, "No, I got that. I'll take care of that." And you just want to make sure that if you're getting high winds and VFX in post, that any real debris like on the ground is blowing at the same speed. So it's just a lot of planning, and then saves a lot of work in post-production if you get it in camera as much as possible.
Sort of getting into like specific scenes in the movie, the climax of the movie takes place in like a movie theater that gets destroyed. Can you talk about destroying a movie theater?
Yeah, it was, so we knew we had a movie theater all along, and that was a nice nod to the first film where there's a, tornado at a drive-in theater and where they sort of shining, and we knew we wanted a monster movie. So I knew from early on that was something we had to work out. With the theater, we know we had a series of pieces that led up to going into that theater. So we had the main street, we had the marquee, we had the lobby, and then getting into the theater. But when we walked into the theater in El Reno, it was a big volume, but it was so renovated and so changed over time. It wasn't anything cinematic, nor could we get giant fans in there or blow out walls or drop debris. So we just made the decision to say we're going to build the movie theater. So we come down a hallway and we enter into the movie theater. Then we cut to our stage set, there was no blue screen there either. It was all a full build. We were able to build every wall, but I made all the walls, fly away or removable if they had to, and, resettable ceiling pieces falling and seats that are removable. And then the back wall behind the movie screen gets destroyed, but I dressed that pre-destroyed because we don't see it until the screen gets torn out anyway. So that was already set up as aftermath. It just got revealed by the screen. But that was just something that we also knew the style. I wanted it to be kind of a classic, Midwestern, 1930s, 40s kind of movie hall and just have all that kind of detail. So it was just really important to make it believable, that it didn't look like a set, that I could get, some of the, detail and plaster work in there and get the palette just right. And, we built a model of it to make sure we were all talking about how we needed this thing to come apart to shoot and get the scene we wanted. And then we just built that on stage, and it cut together pretty well.
So with the nature of this film, Twisters and the first one being essentially like the same threat returning like 5 different times and sort of with increasing severity, I was wondering how you in your design like remained conscious of that, and how you made decisions about how we're going to up the ante a little bit each time, and what we're going to save for later, and what's going to be the big finale, and how you like take those 5 different steps.
Yeah, that was primarily determined in the writing, but then another thing that visual effects wanted to do was make sure that each tornado had its own distinct look. Obviously, for dramatic effect, you want the threat to grow and the tension to build and the drama to build. So the idea is like go bigger, bigger, bigger. But in our case, it wasn't always the thing, because we had the F5 at the beginning that we thought was an F2, And then that had that big climax. So, and then the cut and whoop, and then we go back again. And so we almost start back and then build again. There was an important thing about the first tornado, the tornado at the motel and rodeo, and then the final tornado, that we wanted it to be the monster that was chasing Kate. That the other ones were sort of the science part of it, like when they had their failed tornado test with Tyler out in the field, and then they had lunch, things like that. That felt more benign. That felt more fun. Even the first tornado, when she first gets there, that hits the windmills and all of that, there's a nonchalance with Tyler cruising across the landscape, and the blades are crashing down next to him, and he's just riding it out. He's literally riding a bull that it looks super dangerous, but he's just casual. He's like, it's a walk in the park to him. There was the intentional nature of the sort of semi-benign versus the super threatful. Threatful. Did I just say threatful?
Threatening? I don't know.
Threatening. Dang it. Yeah. I don't know what my deal. Super threatening tornadoes. And that was, so she was obviously frightened by the first tornado that she came back, and you see it in her face. So she's taking a while to get back in the game. So you get that part of the story, but you got Tyler launching fireworks into it, no big deal kind of thing. So they both had different experiences with the same tornado. So there was that kind of arc to it. But when it hits the motel, you feel like it's chasing after her. It comes at night. It's super brutal. She's responsible now for the lives of other people, and her decisions are, their lives are riding on her good decision versus bad decision, like what happened in the first film. So there's that. And then the final one is when she faces the monster down. And that obviously had to be an F5 and grow. And that's why it started so early and then hit the refinery and came upon itself and then became bigger. And it's that. Yeah, I pondered the notion of, where do you go from here? If it does really well and people want more, is it more of the same? But that's up to the writers to come up with something brilliant and find a way to reinvent it. Yeah, add the stakes and up the ante and all of that. But that's the writers, will follow their lead. So.
Sort of wrapping up, talking about Twisters, when sort of reflecting on the film and your time on it, is there like a lesson learned over the course of making the movie that you will carry onto future projects?
I think it's something that was good about the film. It made more concrete and made me have more conviction in how I knew I would approach a project, with sort of that idea that always remain enthusiastic. To me, it's not work. I literally haven't worked in 30 years. I go to that job, but it's like, it's just ridiculously fun, and it's always a new challenge. So my mindset is never that there's no drudgery. I never look forward to Fridays and dread Monday. And something of that scale that I was tossed into, I adapted and I pulled it off. And it was an incredible sort of building of my self-confidence that I felt I had, but this proved it. And I was sort of thrown into the fire, and I just did it because now I realize that a big movie is nothing more than a big, small movie. Your process is sort of the same. Your challenges are kind of the same. The sequence of things are the same. The questions that have to get answered, the people that had to be satisfied with information, all that all remain the same. It's just more of it. And for me, I joke with people that it was like I could retire now because I've just bookended my career like that, and doing Twister, then Twisters. So everything else is gravy for me pretty much. And at this point, there's no real challenge that I haven't faced or been thrown. And I just catalog everything, and I think back to what I did in certain film 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and just bring it to the fore and put it to work.
Yeah, so I'm a big Tom Cruise guy, and you worked as a set designer on Collateral. And anytime we're lucky enough to have someone that worked on a Cruise feature, we always just sort of ask, what was that like? Do you have any Cruise stories?
Yeah, I forgot whether I was a set designer or an assistant art director. I got called David Wasco. Quick, short answer is I never met him on the movie. Sadly, I never did. Especially as a set designer, you're often stuck in the art department. The interesting thing about that film is Michael Mann, who's a character unto himself, and he's amazing.
Yep, we've been told.
But he's also very demanding, very exacting, very precise, and
We've been told.
Yeah, so I'm not telling you anything new. But I was brought on, and all I did was the Korean nightclub interior, and that was it. And the funny thing is, Michael Mann is famous. You may know this too. He just shoots locations. He doesn't shoot sets. He doesn't go to a soundstage. But for some reason, this one was. There was a Korean nightclub entrance, but then when we went inside, it wasn't laid out right for what the sequence that he wanted for crews to be taking out each of the bad guys and then arriving at the guy in the booth that he had to shoot. So I would build these white models, and like every other day, I would have to present it to Michael Mann, and he'd say, no, a little further, make this curve a little deeper, no, move this, elongate the bar here so it blocks the view. So it was that. But when I finally see it in the film, it's so cut together. I was like, you could have just done this anyway. It's kind of funny. But the way it was edited, and it was great. It was great, but it didn't require that continuous action. But it was cool to see, and it was cool to work on it. And I've never seen Tom Cruise in person, oddly enough. And I was on a really early version of Minority Report too. It was going, and then it shut down. And then when it came back, Spielberg had taken over again, and I was on something else. So never saw him at all. So sorry.
Well, let us know if you do. You actually provided a great segue, because we were going to ask about AI, artificial intelligence, which you also worked on. If you could, we like to refer to him as Uncle Steve. If you had any interaction with him, or just the movie as well.
No, I did on that one, and it was a while ago. That was where I was. It was another one of those pivotal moments in my career where I was assistant art director on that, and then I got a call to say, "Are you ready to art direct?" And then I left that film a bit early. But it was another one of those films where I only did one set, and the crazy, and it was like Collateral, where I only did the flesh fair. I was just like the art director on the flesh fair. So again, building the model of that and working out the cage below and the craziness above and the way the stands and the lights, blah blah blah. But I built the model, and then Steven comes in. He's fine. Everybody calls him Steven. He comes in, and he's looking at all the models. And then back in the day, we had these little cameras. They're like a little chip with a little lens. It has a cord, so you got to kind of be careful with the cord when you're. So we handed him the camera, and he starts moving it through my model, and I just thought that was a blast to see it on the monitor and see him lining up the shot through the turnstile, Teddy going through the tent area and then up into the stands. And as he moves the cord, it falls out of his hand or something. He knocks over one of my big model light stands. And it was really funny because his first instinct was to apologize profusely. I'm like, I don't care. I'll put it back together. It's not like I'm going to do my model. But no, he was really, really cool. And that was fun. And just to see him imagining shots and just to watch him working and the gears turning was pretty cool. Like, in down underwater scene when he's down there frozen or whatever, and the blue fairy's there, and he talks about the Ferris wheel starting to fall, and he goes, "We don't see the Ferris wheel. We just see the shadow on him perceptibly moving." And I was like, that's such a Spielberg shot, just imagine that. But, and knowing it was really a cool thing when Isaac told me that Steven Spielberg spent a couple of days in the editing bay with him on Twisters, and I thought it was so cool that he's seeing my work and knowing that he's seeing what I've done, and to feel the movie as like, it feels so Amblin Entertainment. I think it feels like a throwback 90s kind of wholesome, popcorn fun. So I got a charge out of that. But I think wonder if there's any other crossing. But Jaws was integral to my formation of love for movies. It scared the bejesus. There it is. I mean, I saw that in the theater. I was 6 years old. I had no business being there. But my uncle, who was taking care of me for the day, he was only like 7 years older. We just jumped on public transportation and went to the mall. Somehow they let us in. And I remember like shivering like crazy, going, does he die? Does he die? And it freaked me out so bad. And, it's not something I want to tell Steven Spielberg about it, but we've heard it a million times. But that was formative. That's one of my favorite movies of all time.
For only
Yeah,
having
you-
worked on one set of each of these movies, you worked on like the pivotal scenes of each of these movies. Like the nightclub scene is like the big dog
Yeah.
scene of the movie for me.
Well, it's luck of the draw, purely. I didn't ask it. Funny stories otherwise. When I was interviewing for the first Men in Black, I didn't know it was the first Men in Black, just Men in Black at the time. And I was looking at Bo Welch's sketches and drawings all over the wall. And I'm like, I don't even have the job. And I remember looking at the sketch of the Men in Black headquarters. And I'm like, all right, I'll work on the movie if I get to do that set. Because it was just a sketch. So my job is to develop those details and turn it into a three-dimensional thing. So I was sort of like being jokingly cocky to Tom, the art director, and saying, well, I'll do your movie if you let me do that. And he goes, well, we'll see how it works out. And I was like, no, I want to do that one. And then he hired me, and then he made sure I got to do that set. But it was just, a nice piece of architecture. And coming from that world, I was not far removed from architecture. So, and Bo and Tom were both former architects. So we all kind of got along really well. But yeah, it was just luck. We didn't know what it was. The interesting AI was crazy because I never knew what the whole movie was. They didn't let anybody read the whole script. I was only allowed to sit in a room, sign out the script, sit at a table, read my pages, and then give it back and leave. So nobody knew what the big picture was. And that was just a crazy kind of atmosphere for that, but just fell right into it.
So, in talking about like being assigned different sets as an art designer, I'm wondering, is there any sort of like diplomacy of, oh, I'm good at this because I've done this, this, and this, and so for that reason I'm pleading my case to do this set? Or is it just like random, or not random, obviously, or if you could just sort of talk about how that's assigned?
Well, when I was a set designer, it was sort of playing to your strengths. And, as a set designer, you might be drawing an 1860s barn, and then, a couple of weeks later, you're doing a crash flying saucer. So, you sort of develop what it is, or you do the research that it takes. And ultimately, you're doing construction documents. But at the art director level, on Twisters, I did do that. I knew what the credits of people and what they've been used to working on. So I kind of did gravitate them towards certain types of sets in terms of the logistics required, or all the sort of like engineering required, or whether it was a steel structure or whatever. There was a bit of that, but we're in this business. We're kind of chameleons. So we do that. But that was part of my joke with the Men in Black. I said, I want to do that set. And I think he agreed that I would be the right guy to do that set ultimately. But there was plenty of other really cool stuff to do. So, it was plenty to go around. But what he was pointing at, it was a matter of timing. The film has a schedule, a shoot schedule. Then there are also lead times that it takes to design and build something. So all that has to be considered. He just figured you might be on something and we have to jump on that, and you're not finished this thing and it'll go to someone else. And it just worked out. I was able to kind of make it all work. But there's a bit of back and forth, and it's a balance for sure. It's about necessity, but most people are pretty adaptable.
Sort of starting to wrap up. Is there anything that you've worked on or are working on that you can talk about?
Yeah, right now I'm on a film with Mick G, the director Mick G, and we're doing The Way of the Warrior Kid, which was a book by a former Navy SEAL named Jocko Willink, and it's about Uncle Jake, who's a Navy SEAL, gets injured on an op, and he spends the summer back home where his old house where he grew up, and his sister lives there now, and with her nephew, or his nephew, her son. And he's kind of getting bullied, having a tough time in school. So the kid asks Uncle Jake to toughen him up and discipline him. And it's kind of like that. So it's a really cool tone film. I think instantly of the Karate Kid, that kind of vibe and that kind of feel good, and some of those beats. But it's pretty ambitious, and it's got a big opening act, and it's got a big act 3. And that's all I'll say. But it's going to be a lot of fun, and I think it'll do pretty well. People will respond to it.
So, Parth, is it time for the Big Kahuna final question?
I think it's time.
So the Big Kahuna Yeah, don't be too intimidated. So the Big Kahuna final question is, what is the last great film you watched? Just as a viewer, and our only criteria is it can't just be good; it has to be great.
Wow, last great film. I
Oh, and it can be like a first-time viewing, or you can rewatch a movie you've already seen and loved. But you're
well,
just
you
like,
just
that's
made it
freaking
easy
good.
for me. Then you just made it really easy. No, because what I watch all the time, and wanted my son to see it. It was Cool Hand Luke. Cool Hand Luke has always been my favorite. I saw it like when I started to watch films with my dad. That was one that I saw with my dad, and that was pretty astounding. I mean, not only from a story point, but from just tour de force acting and everybody from top to bottom, and just the overall tone of the film. It just kind of drew me in, and it's something I revisit all the time because I just love that world and that character. So yeah, I last saw it. Yeah, it's only been a couple of months before I got back here to LA to work, so it was pretty recent. So I'd say that one.
My mom often cites Paul Newman as like the most gorgeous man of all time.
I can say I met him once, but it wasn't anything to do with work. And he is a strikingly handsome man, but he he's really cool. I was at his camp for sick children back in like 1990s. My roommate from college worked at his camp, and he brought me up as like a stagehand at the theater there, and it was a blast. And I saw a very young, even very strikingly handsome Alec Baldwin there, like fresh off of like Humphrey Red October and stuff. And Kevin Kline was there, Phoebe Cates, and like Broadway writers Coleman. It was a blast, and it was just like Danny Aiello's over here and Big Bird's over there. It was like, and I wasn't in the movie business, so this was all like crazy cool to me. So but Paul Newman, he was obviously much older, and Joanne Woodward, but they were just the sweetest. And they just were, you could tell they were totally into each other, forever. So it was pretty cool to see. It was awesome.
Alrighty, Parth, I'm going to bring us out. Thank you so much to our guest, Patrick Sullivan. He's the production designer behind such films as Gerald's Game, Brightburn, and of course our film for today, Lee Isaac Chun's Twisters, with an S, with a big ol' S at the end, because there's multiple movies
twins
and multiple tornadoes. Twins! Thank you again for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Whoa.
Parth, my socks just got knocked off because it's like a big gust of wind just picked me up and threw me across the room.
Oh
And
god.
it's like, how are we supposed to measure the internal calculations of the tornado unless we get a frickin' robot measurer inside the tornado? Do you know what I'm saying?
That bit like started strong and then
When I was saying robot, I was like, it's not a robot.
No, it's not. It's really not how this movie goes. But this interview went pretty well, unlike that bit.
Yeah, no, this was probably the first failed bit on the show. Which
Sure,
after
196 episodes, and we have only screwed up one bit. I would say that's pretty good.
Yeah, so if you look at it that way, it's like the glass is like 196 halves full. You know?
196 full, 197 half full, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. So we're gonna
it's kind of shocking that those were the words that were going to be in your mouth, but yeah, thank you so much to Patrick Sullivan for coming on the show. You were a super awesome, super cool guest. We hope to have you again very soon.
That I was gonna say.
Next week we have a guest lined up, but we haven't recorded the interview yet. And
don't want to jinx it. Knock on wood.
Well, our third episode or second episode or something like that, we promised our third episode we promised a guest, and then it didn't happen.
Our third episode ever?
Yes. And ever since then, I've becoming very wary of like if I ever say that we're doing an interview for a movie,
before it happens.
Before it happens, I'd just be cuckoo to say anything about it, I guess.
Parth, is that like a bowl of Cocoa Puffs in front of you? Because like you seem particularly crazed. In other words, cuckoo. Like, Parth, if there was an old-timey clock...
Sure.
And a sort of bird were to shoot out of this clock to
The
alert
dodo.
you... No, that's extinct. To alert you of the time, it might say, cuckoo, cuckoo. Sort of like a cuckoo clock.
Sure.
And this ties in because the movie we'll be covering next week is M. Night
Despicable Me
Shyamalan's
4.
Is M. Night Shyamalan's Split, which covers a crazy guy being all crazy.
That's right, folks. Next week's episode is on both M. Night Shyamalan's Split
We're
and
covering
a Split
again,
episode.
even though we already did it.
and Despicable Me 4. The Despicable Me 4 jokes, they'll just never run out. A second failed bit for this episode.
Second all time. So now I have one and Parth has one. And
Yeah.
so now we're equal. And so now we
Exactly.
just have to be funny consistently.
Yeah.
Till
Funny,
we die.
not crazy, not cuckoo. I repeat, the next episode cannot be cuckoo. But you can certainly check us out, whatever our next episode may be.
You'd have to be cuckoo not to.
Yeah. Where, Trent?
So you're going to go on Instagram or Twitter. Parth, it's funny, on the podcast I listen to, they're like, and check us out on Twitter or on Instagram and X. And I'm like, some of us are peacefully protesting that. And here on Craft Services, it's still Twitter. So yeah, check us out on Instagram or Twitter. Thank you. And you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Pandora, frankly, wherever you get your podcasts.
It's true. Thank you so much to Patrick Sullivan again, and we'll be looking forward to our episode next week, guys. See ya. Bye.
Bye.